For years, the same answer was repeated whenever someone questioned what had happened to one of the most important institutions founded by St. John Paul II. Nothing has changed. We're simply updating the pastoral approach. The doctrine remains exactly the same. That explanation was repeated so many times that many Catholics eventually accepted it, until one of the very men responsible for the transformation admitted something no one expected to hear. He admitted that the change was not merely pastoral, it was doctrinal. Those words changed everything. Because if the doctrine itself became the object of reform, then the debate was never simply about methods. It was about the faith itself. By the end of this video, you'll understand why one interview has reopened a controversy many believed had already been settled. You'll understand what happened inside one of the Church's most influential academic institutions. You'll understand why one respected theologian says this was never an academic disagreement, but an ideological revolution. And finally, you'll be able to answer one unavoidable question. Can doctrine ever be updated simply because modern society finds it difficult to live? Let's begin where the story actually starts. The year was 1981. Only 3 years had passed since the election of Pope John Paul II. The Church was already facing enormous cultural pressure. Marriage was increasingly viewed as temporary. Divorce was spreading across the Western world. Artificial contraception had become socially acceptable. Abortion laws were expanding throughout Europe and North America. The moral foundations of the family were under attack from every direction. John Paul II understood that responding to this crisis required more than speeches. It required formation. It required scholarship. It required an institution capable of defending Catholic teaching at the highest intellectual level. So he founded the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family in Rome. This was not intended to be another university department. It was designed to become the Church's intellectual center for defending Catholic teaching on marriage, sexuality, family life, and moral theology. Its mission was unmistakable: to deepen the understanding of the Church's perennial teaching, to explain why marriage is indissoluble, to defend humanae vitae, to explore the theology of the body, to demonstrate that moral truth is not invented by culture, but revealed by God. The first president chosen to lead this mission was Cardinal Carlo Caffarra. Few men were better prepared. John Paul II personally entrusted him with the task. Caffarra had spent years defending humanae vitae against fierce criticism. He understood the theological foundations of marriage. He understood moral theology. Most importantly, he understood that pastoral care without doctrinal truth eventually loses both. For decades, the Institute became exactly what John Paul II intended. Students from around the world traveled to Rome. Priests, bishops, religious sisters, lay scholars. They studied marriage not as a sociological phenomenon, but as a divine vocation. They defended the existence of intrinsically evil acts. They explained why veritatis splendor mattered. They argued that Christian morality was rooted in objective truth rather than subjective experience. For many Catholics, the Institute became a symbol, a place where the Church's teaching was not merely preserved, but developed faithfully. Then something changed. The year was 2016. Pope Francis appointed Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia to lead the Institute. At first, many assumed it was simply a change of leadership. Every institution eventually receives a new president. That alone was not remarkable. The real transformation came 1 year later. In 2017, Francis issued the Motu Proprio Summa Familiae Cura. Officially, it reorganized the Institute. Unofficially, many believed it fundamentally changed its mission. The name changed, the statutes changed, the governing structure changed, the academic orientation changed. Most significantly, the Institute increasingly focused on interpreting and promoting Amoris Laetitia, Supporters described this as a natural development. Critics saw something very different. They believed an institute founded to defend immutable moral principles was now being redirected toward emphasizing pastoral discernment and exceptional situations. For years, this disagreement remained largely theoretical. Each side described the changes differently. One side spoke about renewal. The other spoke about rupture. Neither could definitively prove its interpretation. Then came 2019. What happened that year convinced many observers that something much larger was taking place. Several of the Institute's most respected professors suddenly lost their positions. Among them was Monsignor Livio Melina. This was not merely another faculty member. Melina had served as president of the Institute itself. He had dedicated decades of his life to developing John Paul II's moral theology. His chair of fundamental moral theology simply disappeared, not transferred, not renamed, abolished. Alongside him, other distinguished professors also departed. Father José Noriega, Father José Granados, scholars internationally respected for their work on Catholic moral theology. The changes did not occur in one dramatic moment. They unfolded gradually, wave after wave, until many former students looked around and scarcely recognized the institution they had once attended. Protests followed. Letters were written. Petitions circulated. Former graduates expressed concern. But nothing changed. The new direction continued. At the time, defenders of the restructuring offered a consistent explanation. They insisted the Church's doctrine remained untouched. Only the pastoral emphasis had evolved. Theological foundations remained secure. The mission was simply expanding. That explanation became the standard response whenever criticism emerged. Until recently, because something remarkable happened. On May 21st, Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia gave an interview that would reopen the entire debate. For years, critics had argued the reforms affected doctrine itself. For years, Vatican officials rejected that accusation. Now, Paglia himself openly acknowledged something unexpected. He explained that the changes involved not only pastoral practice, but doctrine. Those words immediately attracted attention, because they appeared to confirm precisely what critics had been saying all along. Let's pause for a moment. Words matter, especially when spoken by someone directly responsible for an institution's transformation. There is an enormous difference between saying, "We emphasize doctrine differently," and saying, "Doctrine itself became part of the reform." The first suggests continuity. The second suggests something much larger. Imagine renovating a historic cathedral. For years, everyone insists only the decoration has changed. Only the lighting, only the furniture. Then the architect suddenly admits, actually, we also rebuilt part of the foundation. Immediately, every previous assurance sounds different. That is exactly why Paglia's interview became so important, because it changed the conversation. Not by introducing new accusations, but by confirming old ones. Yet the story does not end there. A few weeks later, another voice entered the discussion. A voice many Catholics had not heard publicly for years. Monsignor Livio Melina. Unlike many commentators, Melina was not speaking from outside. He had lived this history. He had taught within those classrooms. He had led the institute. He knew its original purpose. He knew its professors. He knew its intellectual tradition. And now, after years of relative silence, he decided it was time to respond. His essay, published on June 19th, did not merely criticize administrative decisions. It offered something much deeper, an interpretation of what he believed had truly happened. According to Melina, the transformation was never driven primarily by theological argument. It was driven by ideology. That is a serious accusation. Not disagreement, not academic debate. Ideology. He argued that the traditional teaching on marriage had come to be viewed by certain influential figures as unrealistic. Not false, not disproven, simply too difficult for contemporary people to live. And once that assumption was accepted, everything else followed naturally. Because if a doctrine is considered impossible to live, the temptation soon appears. Not to raise people toward the doctrine, but to lower the doctrine toward people's experience. That distinction lies at the center of the entire controversy, and it is precisely there that our story continues. The question is no longer whether changes occurred. The changes are visible. The question now is something much deeper. Why did they happen? And perhaps more importantly, what vision of the Church made them seem necessary? Monsignor Livio Molina believes he knows the answer. His response is striking, not because of its tone, but because of its precision. He does not accuse Archbishop Paglia of making a theological mistake in one particular argument. He argues that the entire project rested upon a different understanding of what moral theology is supposed to do. According to Molina, the traditional teaching of the Church on marriage was gradually treated as an ideal that ordinary people could no longer realistically achieve. That assumption changed everything. Because once you begin with the belief that God's moral law is simply too demanding for modern men and women, every theological discussion moves in the same direction. The question is no longer, what has Christ revealed? The question becomes, how much of this teaching can contemporary people reasonably be expected to live? Those two questions may sound similar. In reality, they lead to completely different destinations. The first begins with revelation. The second begins with sociology. The first asks what God has commanded. The second asks what modern culture finds acceptable. This, Molina argues, is the true paradigm shift. For centuries, Catholic moral theology has always assumed something fundamental. God never commands the impossible. Grace accompanies every commandment. Human weakness is real. Temptation is real. Failure is real. But divine grace is also real. The gospel never promises that holiness will be easy. It promises that holiness is possible through Christ. That conviction runs through the entire history of the Church. The saints did not become saints because God's commandments were lowered to match human weakness. They became saints because grace lifted human weakness toward God's commandments. That movement has always gone upward, never downward. Molina fears that something different has begun to happen. Instead of asking how grace can elevate the person, theology increasingly asks how doctrine can be adapted to the person's present condition. That reversal changes everything. Because once doctrine becomes flexible enough to accommodate every difficult situation, it gradually loses its ability to challenge anyone. The gospel ceases to call people to conversion. Instead, it begins confirming them exactly where they already are. History offers many examples of this temptation. Every generation has believed that certain commandments were simply too difficult. The early Christians lived in a Roman Empire where divorce was common. The Church did not change Christ's teaching on marriage. The medieval world often accepted violence and revenge. The Church continued preaching forgiveness. Modern society increasingly separates sexuality from marriage. The Church continues presenting the same moral vision she has always proclaimed, not because culture remains unchanged, but because revelation does not change. This is why Molina's criticism reaches beyond one institute. His concern is methodological. He believes that once theology begins treating difficult doctrines as unrealistic ideals rather than revealed truths, the process becomes impossible to stop. Because every doctrine eventually becomes difficult. Every commandment eventually becomes demanding. Every truth eventually conflicts with someone's experience. Where does the process end? If marriage can be reinterpreted because modern society struggles with lifelong commitment, why not every other moral teaching? If one commandment is adjusted to fit contemporary circumstances, What prevents the next adjustment? And the one after that? Molina writes that ideology often functions as a disguise for interests that cannot openly admit themselves. It is a provocative statement, but he immediately explains what he means. He believes the hidden assumption behind the reforms is not that traditional doctrine is false, rather that it is impractical. Notice the distinction. No one claims Christ was mistaken. Instead, it is suggested that his teaching may no longer be fully applicable to contemporary life. This difference matters enormously, because once practicality becomes the measure of doctrine, the standard quietly shifts. The question ceases to be, is it true? It becomes, can most people live it? That may sound compassionate, but Christianity has never measured truth by convenience. If it had, the cross itself would have disappeared. The cross is not practical. Forgiveness is not practical. Loving one's enemies is not practical. Remaining faithful until death is not practical. Yet Christ commands all of these things, not because they are easy, because they are true. This brings us to another important point. The Church has always distinguished between doctrine and pastoral care. Doctrine answers the question, what is true? Pastoral care asks, how do we help people live this truth? The second question is extremely important. Pastors must accompany. They must encourage. They must forgive. They must patiently lead souls toward holiness. But pastoral care has traditionally assumed that doctrine remains fixed. A physician may patiently help a patient recover. He does not redefine health simply because recovery is difficult. Likewise, the Church accompanies sinners without redefining sin. She forgives failure without denying truth. That balance has characterized Catholic pastoral care throughout history. Molina argues that this balance has been disrupted. Instead of adapting pastoral methods while preserving doctrine, doctrine itself increasingly appears to be interpreted through pastoral experience. That reversal, he warns, changes the entire structure of moral theology. And perhaps this explains why the controversy surrounding the Institute became so emotional. Because people sensed that something larger than administrative reform was taking place. They were not arguing about professors. They were arguing about first principles. What is doctrine? Can doctrine develop? Certainly. The Church has always taught authentic doctrinal development. But authentic development means deeper understanding. Not contradiction, not reversal, not replacing one truth with its opposite. St. John Henry Newman explained this beautifully. A tree grows. It develops, it becomes larger, but it never stops being the same tree. Development preserves identity. It does not abolish it. That distinction is crucial. Because many Catholics today fear that development is sometimes being confused with transformation. One deepens the truth, the other replaces it. The concern expressed by Molina is that the institute founded to defend John Paul II's moral theology gradually became the place where that very theology was questioned. Whether one agrees with his assessment or not, the significance of his testimony cannot easily be dismissed. He witnessed these events from within. He was not commenting from a distance. He experienced the transition personally. There is another detail that deserves attention. In 2025, Leo XIV removed Archbishop Paglia from leadership of the Institute. Many interpreted this as an attempt to begin correcting the direction established during previous years. Perhaps. Perhaps not. Time will tell. Leadership can change, but institutions are more difficult to rebuild. Professors dismissed years earlier do not automatically return. Academic chairs abolished do not instantly reappear. Intellectual traditions interrupted require years, sometimes decades, to recover. Removing one administrator cannot immediately restore an entire culture. This is why the consequences of these events continue to matter. Not because Catholics wish to relive old controversies, but because future generations will receive their formation from the institutions that exist today. Ideas taught in seminaries become sermons. Ideas taught in universities become diocesan policies. Ideas shape pastors. Pastors shape parishes. Parishes shape families. This is why institutions matter. They quietly influence the future long before anyone notices the results. Yet despite everything, there remains an important reason for hope. The Church has endured theological crises before. Entire schools of thought have risen and disappeared. Institutions have flourished and declined. Universities have changed direction. The gospel has remained. Christ's words regarding marriage remain exactly as they were when he first spoke them. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. Those words do not depend upon professors. They do not depend upon institutes. They do not depend upon academic programs. They belong to Christ. And because they belong to Christ, they endure. That is perhaps the deepest lesson of this entire story. Buildings can be renovated. Institutions can be reorganized. Faculty can be dismissed. Statutes can be rewritten. But revealed truth cannot be rewritten by administrative decree. It can be obscured. It can be neglected. It can be ignored, but it cannot cease to be true. The faithful, therefore, should neither despair nor become bitter. They should study the faith, read Scripture, read the Catechism, read the great encyclicals of the Church, learn why Catholic teaching exists before listening to arguments about changing it. Because a doctrine understood is far more difficult to abandon than a doctrine merely inherited. We began with one remarkable admission. A senior prelate acknowledged that the transformation of the Institute involved doctrine itself. That confession has reopened an important conversation, not about personalities, not about politics, but about whether the Church's moral teaching is something to be protected or something to be continually reshaped by history. For 2,000 years, the Church has answered that question the same way. Truth develops in understanding. It does not change in substance. And that is why Christ's teaching on marriage remains as demanding, as beautiful, and as necessary today as it was when he first proclaimed it. What do you think? Do you believe the changes at the John Paul II Institute represented authentic development, or did they mark a deeper shift in Catholic moral theology? Comment below. Amen. God bless you.